Some governments, like the United States, made money available for fishermen to buy new boats. Others, such as Canada, built fishing fleets themselves. For a time it worked well for Canada, especially Newfoundland and Labrador, a private province that survived almost entirely on fishing for cod. Fishermen, fish companies, and the Canadian government were all making money. Fish, an important export for Canada, was helping the country to bring in money from other countries. Thanks to the new 200-mile limit, almost everyone in the Atlantic Canada was happy for more than 10 years. But there was one unhappy group, a group of fishermen in Newfoundland. These were tough and hardy men who lived in little villages along the coast and went to sea the way their grandfathers and great-grandfathers had, in small wooden boats called skiffs. They dropped tarps made of knotted rope and left them there until they were filled with cod and were ready to haul up. Or they fished with baited hook on line and they hauled up by hand. It was dangerous work in icy waters, full of treacherous icebergs that had broken off from the polar cap. The water was so cold that they would freeze to death in minutes if they fell in. When their catches got small and smaller, they thought it was because the big new boats far out at sea were taking all the fish. At that point, it was only their inshore fish that were vanishing, so the deep water fishermen paid little attention. Even in the 1980s, a century after trawlers were found to be destroying the North Sea, many still believe that the codfish population of the Grand Banks, known as the northern stock, was in no danger because it was one of the most plentiful fish populations in recorded history. The skiff fishermen went to scientists, and many scientists agreed with them, but the government had their own scientists who reported that the northern stock was not in danger. So many fish were being caught and so much money was being made that the government didn't want to listen to a few old-fashioned skiff fishermen. They were providing jobs processing fish at sea for many people who had not had work before the 200-mile limit. The Canadian fleet was landing huge quantities of cod, more than ever before, so there was a lot of fish out there. But they didn't consider the other possibility, that the catches were large because they were catching all of the fish. Ralph Mayo, a marine biologist in New England, compared the problem of measuring fish populations to measuring icebergs. It is generally agreed only 10% of an iceberg is actually visible above the ocean. The other 90% is hidden under the ocean. Mayo called this the perception problem. With fish, he said, you see some cod and assume this is the tip of the iceberg, but it could be the whole iceberg. And in the case of cod, it turned out to be the entire iceberg. What happened to the Grand Banks is that modern fishing had become so powerful, so effective, the fishermen were able to hunt down every last fish in the dying population without realizing that it was dying. In the case of the codfish on the Grand Banks, the catches were quite large until suddenly there were no more fish. So in 1992, John Crosby, the Canadian fishing minister, announced that the northern stock had nearly vanished. No one would be allowed to fish cod in the Grand Banks until the population was replenished. 30,000 Newfoundland fishermen instantly lost their jobs. The island province was plunged into poverty. In 1994, the ban was extended to almost all the fishing grounds in the area. These were seen as temporary measures, but more than 15 years later, the cod population has shown no sign of recovery, and it seems the people of Newfoundland will not be getting back their livelihoods. There are still cod there, but the population has not regenerated. Perhaps the cod has lost its place in the food chain, and other animals were now eating its food. Perhaps, as Darwin had suggested, the population had become too few to sustain the species. Rarity, Darwin had stated clearly, leads to extinction. But at least the fundamental debate was now over. There could be no denying that overfishing was a real threat. The huge populations, even the most numerous, could be permanently destroyed by the unrestrained acts of humans. Now the debate shifted from the question of whether overfishing was leading to the decline of fish in the ocean to what should have been done to prevent this from happening.